There we go. Recording in progress. Superb. I am recording tonight. So if you don't want to be seen, feel free to turn off your camera. That's absolutely fine by me. I would very much appreciate it if we could mute ourselves just in case of woofy, barky dogs in the background, because we generally all have those, don't we? I know I certainly do. You may well hear Bob perk up at some point during the course of the session. Hopefully not, though. So you're going to have to forgive me somewhat slightly. I've got lots of notes on a computer that's just sat ever so slightly to my left. So you might see me doing this a fair bit as I just catch myself and make sure I know I'm going in the same direction that I want to be going in, because it's quite knowledge heavy tonight. And I want to make sure that I give you everything that I've got. So I'm going to get started straight away. If anybody else comes in, I'll just let them in and I'll keep talking as we go, just like this. People are still coming in, but I'm just going to keep going so that we all get a good experience here. Now, first thing to say is hello and welcome. This is our very first focused dog training nerdy Zoom, and I am quite excited by it. Tonight's session is Domestication and Dominance Science. We're going to be looking at quite a lot of scientific studies today. And it's really nice to see so many people's names that I know already, which is quite nice, but also some that I don't know as well, which is really nice. So thank you for joining us. It's quite exciting stuff. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rach. I'm the founder and owner here at Focus Dog Training, and also over at Bob and Pal's Dog Walking. I am a certified dog trainer with the Dog Training College, and also I'm a pro dog trainer with Absolute Dogs, and I've done a bazillion. Somebody's done clappy hands. That's excellent work. I didn't know you could do that. Thank you. I'm my ego has been wonderfully boosted there. Yeah, I've done lots of other training courses as well, of course, to get a really nice breadth of knowledge here. My day-to-day job mostly now is for supporting my team, my trainers and my walkers, going out doing their thing, doing the best service that they possibly can do for you guys. And I serve as an assessor for the Pause Therapy dog team too. So I assess their dog trainers' knowledge base to make sure that they're up to date perfectly as well. So I've got quite a lot of knowledge up here, and I'm really excited to share it all with you guys. It's nice to give you the geeky stuff that you don't necessarily find very easily out and about in the world when you're doing your research and doing your reading about your dogs. So very cool. So today we're delving into the fantastic world of domestication. It's fascinating, and challenging some common misconceptions about dominance in dog training. We often hear dominance talked about, and it's nice to know really what does that mean and what does it mean for our dogs as well. I'd love this to be a really informative session. I obviously got a lot to bring for you tonight, but also interactive. So if you think of anything as we're going through, please do write your questions down, and I'll open up the floor at the end for a question and answer, and we can have a really good discussion around some of the topics that we've pulled up on, and maybe challenging some of those beliefs, because we will have heard stuff before, and I will probably be challenging that, and it'd be nice to, talk it through and say, what does this mean for us? So we'll have a nice discussion there at the end. So let's get going then. We'll just dive straight into it. There's no point messing around, is there? We're starting with domestication. And what is domestication, really? So domestication is the process of taming an animal and keeping it either as a pet in our homes or on our farms. And it's really important to know that that process needs to be mutualistic, as in there needs to be a benefit to both us as humans to make us want to do this thing, to make us want to domesticate these animals, but also to the animals themselves. Nobody is going to be domesticated if there's actually no benefit to you at all. So, lions have not been domesticated. It's of no benefit to a lion to be domesticated. So it has to be mutualistic. Margaret, I can see you've got a glass of wine there. That's made my evening. Thank you for doing that. That's exactly how a focused dog training session should go. So the process, it's mutualistic. There's a reason for both parties to be involved in it here. Now, in the case of dogs, it's commonly accepted. I'm sorry, my words. It's commonly accepted that they're domesticated, there we go, from wolves. We all know this. We all agree. It's quite a common thing that we absolutely accept, right? However, it's really, really important for us to acknowledge that although wolves have developed from dogs have developed from wolves. I am really sorry, team. My nerves will settle soon. It's the first one. Well, dogs have developed from wolves, but the common wolf that we see today has also developed from this ancestor in the past. The ancestor that they've both developed from is incredibly different to the wolf that we know nowadays. So at best, what we really do is we consider the wolf that we know to be kind of like a distant cousin to this ancestral wolf. And the ancestral wolf was much bigger. Our wolves today, they've got much smaller heads, much smaller teeth, and much shorter legs. So we think wolves are quite big. I dread to think how big this ancestor wolf was if our wolves today are considered small in comparison. So there's not only been a lot of changes in the dogs from wolf to dog, but also in wolf to wolf. There's been quite a lot of changes there. And it's worth remembering as well that we've also come from chimpanzees. We're related to chimpanzees in the same way that dogs are related to wolves. So there is that common theme, there is that commonality there with our ancestors, but actually we're not the same. And it's not quite right to think of us the same. Like certainly if you tried to treat me like a chimpanzee, I'd take umbrage with you. I think I'd be quite offended that you would consider me the same. And it's fair to say that the same is true of our dogs. It's not appropriate to treat them like wolves. So we're going to look at that a little bit. So, okay. Sorry, please excuse me. My throat is really struggling tonight. So how did dogs become domesticated from wolves? And that's the question. Now, there's two really common theories that are pretty well commonly accepted, but actually when we do some digging into it and thinking about it, maybe they're not quite as sensible as they first appear on the outside. So the first one, the first theory, is that ancient humans kept wolves as pets, right? And they just kept them in their little homes and in their settlements, and they kind of grew up together. Now, in order for that to be successful, they'd have to get the wolf from a tiny cub and they'd have to really hand rear it, because you can't just go in and grab a wolf and decide to keep it as a pet. That's not going to happen. Even with our tamer ones today, it's not going to happen. So it's quite unlikely that they ever went out, just grabbed a wolf and decided to keep it as a pet. They'd have been mauled to death. They might have been able to take a wolf cub and take that away from mum and rear it. Now, that's a really intensive process. To be able to hand rear anything, I don't know if any of you have had any experience with hand rearing, it's a very intense process. I've hand reared a set of kittens and it took a lot out of me. And that's me in the 2000s with access to food and water very easily, not an Ice Age person that really struggled with resources myself. So it's quite intense to do that. Now, even if they were successful and they were able to take this cub away, they were able to rear it and keep it alive, sustain it and feed it and make it grow up, there's a high chance that because they got that cub when it was tiny and it was forming all those lovely impressions, that it probably wouldn't maul them and it probably would be safe. But I don't know if you've ever been to somewhere where there are wolves, even if we have wolves in captivity that we pretty much think are safe, even their handlers take a lot of precautions and they do a lot of things to do safely to make sure they can interact with those wolves. They don't just walk in willy-nilly, because although they probably won't injure you, it's not a guarantee. It's not an absolute guarantee. So they may have been able to raise this cub and it probably wouldn't have hurt them. But as soon as that cub had its own cub, those cubs would also have to be hand reared through the process. They don't pop out being like, oh, mum was okay with you, so I'm okay with you. That's not how it works. They pop out with the same sort of genetics that their mum had. And that the only reason that their mum was okay with the human was because they were hand reared from puppy. So what this means is that they would have to keep a cub from pup, all the way up to adulthood. And then that one, they'd have had to also hand rear all the way up. And then their puppy, they'd have had to hand rear all the way up. So this is a really time intensive process for people living in the Ice Age where just your own survival is very difficult. So it's quite unlikely that that was the scenario that happened. It's too intensive. And actually, the question becomes as well, at what point did these wolves stop looking like wolves and start looking like dogs? There's no real explanation for that there. So that leads us to the second common theory then. And that theory is that humans and wolves figured out that they could hunt alongside each other and that they could work together. And the idea here would be that it would be mutualistic, right? That they could work together to kill stuff and to survive. Now, this is questionable because, first of all, humans and wolves back in the Ice Age, they were both the main predators. And between them, they did an excellent job of making a lot of species extinct. I mean, we've never seen a woolly mammoth because the wolves and the humans in the day saw to it that they became extinct, right? Now, they hunt very, very differently. Wolves are successful because they hunt in packs. There's a big group of them and they're very organized about how they go around and they attack their prey. And as soon as that prey is down, they all descend in. And now they have a hierarchy in which they eat and the order in which they eat. But essentially, once the carcass is down on the floor, it's everybody in and they eat from different parts of the animal, but they all go in once. Humans are very different. The reason we were successful is because we figured out how to make shit that through the air, right? We made weapons and we could take ourselves away from the thing that we were trying to kill. We could say, hey, there's a woolly mammoth over there. Let's throw this pointy thing at it and bring it down that way, right? We kept ourselves at distance and that's what kept us safe. And we were clever and we were able to do that. Now, if we were to join forces with wolves, you can see why this isn't going to work very well, right? Because we haven't been able to train the wolf to do what we want it to do. We've not said that. Wolves can't be trained like dogs. We can't say, hey, boy, go over there and bring down that buffalo for me. And the wolf's going to diligently bring it back to the human. No, if the wolf goes off to hunt, the wolf then swarms in on the carcass and takes it. Well, we're all the way back here with our poxy little weapons. We haven't got a chance to get in. And if we do go, hey, the wolf brought down the prey, let's go and get it, and we walk over to it, well, wolves, they're not going to think, oh, okay, hey, there's a human approaching, best make space for them, we'll back off, help yourself, guys, have a nice meal. They're not at all. They're going to turn around and they're going to jump on us and they're going to see us off very quickly. It just doesn't make sense that we decided to come and join together, because actually it's not mutualistic. It means that actually one of the two of us is not going to get fed. It doesn't make sense to join forces in this respect if we were these two different things. So how did the process happen then? How did it happen? So I'd like to pause on this little talk of Ice Age, the Ice Age world, and I'd like to sidestep over and I'd like to tell you about some awesome research that was done in Siberia on silver foxes, because it was done much, much more recently. But what it does is it gives us an incredible view of how domestication can happen. And then we can apply that backwards and say, actually, it's quite logical that this is what happened with our wolves. So between 1959 and 1985, there was a gentleman called Dmitry Belyaev, and he was the director of cytology and genetics over in Siberia. Now, this is at a time when Darwin's theory of evolution was considered false, and there was a huge sanctions on practicing genetics over in Siberia, like death penalty sanctions. It was a very bad idea to go getting yourself involved in the study of genetics here, and trying to prove Darwin right was a really stupid plan, right? But scientists be scientists and they find ways around things. So Belyaev conducted his experiments and he was very clever to hide them at a fox farm. Now, this fox farm was there to breed foxes, as horrible as this is, breed foxes for the fur trade, right? These beautiful scarves that we used to see people wearing all the time, or round coats and what have you. And these silver foxes were absolutely bred for their fur. So they have a really deep black fur with white bits sticking out of it, and it gave this beauty. These guard hairs were white and they gave this gorgeous appearance of like a silver fur. Now, although these foxes had been in this farm for absolutely years and years and years and years, they were still pretty feral, right? They hadn't really gotten used to the humans. Humans went in regularly to go and see them. They went to feed them. Of course, they went in quite frequently to make sure that they were okay. But the foxes were still very feral. They would still bite them quite a lot. They would still be very wary of them. Generally, they would go to the back of their enclosure, and if they felt threatened, they'd come in and they'd be biting at them. No good, right? And what Belyaev wanted to do was see, could he domesticate these guys? They were pretty feral. Can I do it? Can I domesticate them? So he set about doing it in a very scientific way, and it's pretty cool. What he did was he got his researchers to go in and test these foxes. And the ones that were showing the least amount of aggression to humans, that like 10% of foxes that showed the least amount of aggression to humans, they were pulled out and they were considered the test group. They were allowed to breed with each other. So just the foxes that were okay-ish with the humans, they were still pretty feral, but they maybe bit you less. I think that's the way to think of it, right? They bit you less. They were allowed to breed with each other and they became the test subjects. Now, he's a scientist, so what he also did was he took another set of these foxes and he put them in a thing and he allowed them to breed indiscriminately. He had no control over who they bred with, and that's okay. And that was something that he continued through. Now, these foxes had cubs, kids, and what they did was they sent researchers in every month, and the researchers went in just to go, hiya, How are you this month? Are you going to attack me or not? And what they did was they went in month on month on month until these kits were of the age at which they were able to have their own children and they were able to reproduce themselves. And they took the 10% of those foxes that showed the least amount of aggression and they siphoned them off, cream of the crop. They took them off and they went, you lot can breed with each other now. So we're now starting to take the least aggressive of the least aggressive, right? And we did this for generations and generations and generations. And what he found was it only took 44 generations. That's barely nothing, especially considering foxes can breed at 7 months old. So it didn't take long at all. But he found 44 generations, and these foxes were completely different. Not just a little bit different and a little bit less aggressive. They were completely different. These foxes, the least aggressive ones that have been picked and then bred from and then picked and then bred from and picked and then bred from, they were actively seeking human contact. An investigator, I've lost my words again. Somebody would walk in that room and they would go, hey, you're here. I want to see you. They'd go and approach them. They'd be very wiggly. They wanted to be involved. They'd climb up and they'd give you face licks. They pushed themselves into you. Their bottoms were wiggling as they were going along. They were completely different to this control set of foxes that were allowed to breed wherever they wanted. The control foxes were the same. They were very like, no, I don't like humans. I'm going to bite you if you're going to come too close to me. Absolute polar opposites of these foxes that were actively now seeking out human contact. So 44 generations, and he basically domesticated these foxes. Really cool. Simply by letting the ones breed that were least aggressive to the humans. Now, the even cooler thing we find out here, and this is where it gets really exciting, is that the test foxes looked different. Like not just a bit, but a lot different too. These control foxes, they were the same, beautiful black and white, silver. Their coats were impeccable. They looked just like foxes. The test group that he'd been messing around with, oh, very different. They had floppy ears and they had curly tails and their coats were completely different. So they had splotches of colour in them and they were softer and they weren't uniform anymore. So all these original foxes, very uniform, very much looked the same. These guys, completely different. There was absolutely no predicting what they were going to look like. So there's very physical differences now as well. Just by selecting based on their approach to humans, they physically changed as well. So there must be a connection between our approach to humans and some of our physical traits as well. Really interesting, right? And even more geek than that, just in case you needed the extra layer of geek, they had less of the corticosteroids in their brain. These test subjects had less stress hormones in their brains and more serotonin. How blooming cool is that? They literally had completely different brain chemistry to these guys too. So in 44 generations, so much stuff has changed. Now, that's really important for us when we're looking at dogs and wolves, because it gives us a lot of information about what's most likely to have happened. So let's leave the foxes and go back to the Ice Age, right? Chances are what's actually happened here is at some point, humans started creating settlements. We know they did this, right? They suddenly went, hey up, let's stay still for a bit and let's raise our family together in this one place. And with settlements comes rubbish heaps, because of course we need somewhere to put all of our offcasts, right? Now, for the clever wolf and the right wolf, a rubbish heap is an excellent source of food. It's a very reliable source of food. If you're brave enough to come down from your hideout and come down and approach the settlement and go scavenging around in this rubbish heap, you're going to find a regular source of food. Now, I said it had to be the right wolf, because first of all, the wolf has to be brave enough to come down, right? They have to be actually brave enough to say, I'm going to chance it, guys. I'm going, I'm doing it. And they're going to go down. But they also have to be not aggressive, because if it's an aggressive wolf, the humans in the settlement aren't going to tolerate that at all. They're going to say, no, you're a threat to my children. I'm going to kill you. And they'd make sure that this wolf doesn't come anywhere near their settlement. But if the right wolf, the wolf that was brave enough and that didn't attack the humans when it got there, came down, that's actually beneficial to the humans, because it's reducing that waste pile, right? It's getting rid of some of our off-put here. It's benefit for us. There's a mutually beneficial result here, right? So what we know about the foxes is it's the same as these test subjects, isn't it? These guys are the ones that are least aggressive to the humans. And now they've got a reliable food source. So the chances are that they're quite likely to survive in the Ice Age. And if they're likely to survive and they're coming down here what they're likely to do is bump into other like-minded wolves, right? They're going to bump into other wolves that are also brave, but not very aggressive to humans. And because they're there and because they've got a reliable food source and they're healthy, they're likely to mate with each other, just like the non-aggressive foxes did, right? And so what then happens is these non-aggressive wolves mated with each other and had their offspring. And because they were able to raise their offspring, because there's a reliable source of food, their offspring were able to mate, and so on and so forth. So it's very likely that then what happened was these wolves started to domesticate themselves. It was the brave ones and the ones that were okay with the humans that were able to reproduce. And what we know from the foxes also is that not only did they become tamer as the generations went on, they went from being aggressive to humans to actively seeking their company. And that's the case with these wolves too. They'll have likely gone from being standoffish to actually probably starting to enjoy their company and wanting to be around them. But also they'll have had physical changes too. And this is how we start to explain the change from wolf over through to dog. Their coats will have started changing colour. Their ears will have started becoming floppier. Their tails will have started being curlier. And these dog, wolf, proto-wolf things, proto-dogs, will have looked visibly to our ancient ancestors as very different to the wolf that we need to be wary of in life. Now, it's these proto-dogs that actually we were likely to have potentially kept as puppies because they weren't aggressive to us. And it did make sense for us to bring them into our homes because we liked them, they liked us, they kept us warm, happy days. Kids like playing with them, pulling their tails and whatnot. Chances are it's these dogs, these wolf-dog hybrid things that were kept. And from there, they were able to reproduce. And over time, of course, they've developed into dogs. And I hope that gives you a really good idea of actually how the wolves did transition from being a wolf, being through to these dogs that we see today. So that's domestication in a rather large nutshell. Dominance, you'll be pleased to hear, is a touch more simple, but also interesting. Dominance, we hear very, very often in dog training. And what it really means, dominance is the act of having power or influence over others, right? And in dog training, you'll hear people referring to things like being the alpha, being the top dog, being the leader of the pack. And all of this stems from wolf research. And it kind of sort of makes sense to do wolf research, right? Because we've just established that they've come from wolves. So it kind of sort of makes sense to study wolves. But the problem is, as we know now, actually they are very, very different, aren't they? They act very differently and they think very differently. Somewhere in the 60s, 70s, it became very cool for everybody to start studying wolves. It was a thing, right? Everybody started studying wolves. Now, it's easy to study wolves in captivity, so that's where most of the stuff was done. That's where most of the science was done, because you've got easy access to wolves, right? They're already there. They're in front of you. Makes sense to do that instead of trekking out into the wild, trying to find a wild wolf and keep up with it, right? So we studied a load of wolves in captivity. And there was one particularly popular book by a guy called David Meck. And it was just an easy read. It was picked up and it was referenced by loads and loads and loads of people. And he and all of the other people that were studying the wolves were finding a common theme. Right? What they were finding was, with these wolves that they were studying, there were two top wolves, right? There was an alpha male and an alpha female, the guys that were at the top, right? And underneath them, there was this constant battle and this constant scrapping to get access to the best place to sleep, the food as soon as it arrived in the place where you're going to eat, right? Everyone started scrapping to have first dibs at this food. And also mating rights, the ability to mate with people. There were scraps over it, right? So it was figured that there was a top wolf, an alpha male and an alpha female, and that the wolves were fighting amongst themselves to become this alpha male and alpha female, right? It was easy to read, it was easy to understand, and this book got referenced quite a lot. And because it was easy to read and understand, and because we knew that wolves were sort of related to dogs, it came over to the dog training world, and dog trainers got a hold of it and went, right, well, there we go. There's an alpha, there's a hierarchy, and we need to treat it as such. The problem was that David Meck in particular, but a lot of other people, kind of went, oh, we might have this wrong, guys. Hold on a minute. Because what they then did was they studied the wolves in the wild and they found very different results. In the wild, wolves move in families. And there is an alpha male and alpha female, although they're not really called that anymore. But there's a mum and a dad, right? And a mum and a dad have a set of wolf puppies. And those wolf puppies live with mum and dad. And because it makes sense, those wolf puppies listen to mum and dad. When they say do this, they go, all right then, because the puppies are still learning. They don't know any better. We did the same with our parents, right? We listened mostly to our parents when they told us what to do because they knew best, right? There's no point fighting amongst your family here, because it's your family. Your parents are always going to make sure you're fed. It makes sense to make sure your kids are fed because they're going to keep your generations going, right? So there's no point fighting there. And actually, when your wolf pups get to the age where it makes sense to fight for things like mating rights, well, it doesn't make sense to fight for mating rights within your own family because you don't want to mate with your brother or your sister, do you? So when you get to that age, there's no scrapping amongst these wolves out in the wild. They up and move out. They go find their own family and they become the alpha of their own family, of their own cubs, because that's what makes sense to keep your generations going. So your pups will move out. There's no real fighting within these guys. There's no need for it. Mum and dad know best. And when you think you know best, see you later, son. Off you go. Move out. There's no fighting. So why were they fighting in the zoos? Why did we find all this? The answer there is they weren't familiar. So those wolves that were in captivity, it wasn't how wolves would choose to live. They were forced into that situation. It wasn't a mum and a dad and their cubs. It was everybody out for themselves. It was everybody trying to, it was like the next Boxing Day sale. Everybody for themselves, get your elbows in. You want to get that last top off the rack, right? And everybody had to fight for their resources because there was limited resources and there was no obvious way of splitting it up. So they were fighting about it. So David Meck and all of his companions figured this out and went, guys, we've got this wrong. And I can tell you right now, if you go on his website, he spent the rest of his career trying to debunk his own theory, trying to get his own book unpublished, which is ridiculous. But that bit never made its way over into dog training. It's not as cool. It's not as easy to understand. It's not as sexy. It's not as simple, right? So what we know, the truth is, dogs are related to wolves, but they're very, very different to wolves. It's not fair to think of them like wolves. And they don't scrap amongst themselves. They're not trying to be the top dog or the alpha dog. It doesn't make any sense. When they're in our homes, they concede. They know your mum or dad, right? The equivalent of, you've got access to the food. You bring the food out when it's time to eat. You open the door when it's time to eat. You get the lead out when it's time to go for what they get it. You're the top dog. They don't need any more than that. And they go, do you know what? You provide for me. I quite like it. Yeah, all right then. And they live with us quite happily and quite harmoniously. At no point do our dogs think, I'm the boss of you. They might say, I want access to that thing. So they might say, no, I want the ball more than you want the ball. And I might come for it and I might be all scary and growly. And we might see incidences of like resource guarding or something like that because they want access to that resource. They might try and display a bit of dominance there. But in general, they're not trying to pull one over us. If they're on our sofa, they're not on our sofa because they're trying to show us that they're boss. They're not that clever. If they're on our sofa, they're there because it's comfy and it's warm and it's lovely. And I like sitting on a sofa too. I'd prefer that to sitting on the floor. Duh, dog's going to get up there too. So the thing about knowing and understanding about domestication and dominance just means that we can look at our dogs slightly differently. We can understand that they're not trying to get one over on us and they're actually just doing things that make them happy. Now, it's past the scope of this session to talk about what we can do about it, but that's exactly what we're going to start going into as these weeks progress. Now what we're going to do next week is we're going to look at classical conditioning, what that is and how to do it, and that's the start of us really delving into, now we know this about the dogs, how can we work with them where they are, and what does science tell us about how to teach them what we want them to understand. So we're going to start building on all this knowledge as we move forward. So that's everything I wanted to share with you this evening. Please do feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions that you have. I've got a good 10 minutes before I need to jot off with my little girl, so you can have me for then.
I haven't got a question, but I found that really interesting. Thank you, Rach.
Oh, no worries, Louise. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Around there. Super. Well, I like silence. That obviously means even though I tripped over myself a few times, I must have answered some questions in there. It must have made sense.
Yeah, right. That was really interesting. Thanks, Rach.
No worries, Jess. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad.
Yeah. I was going to ask about I was going to ask about the alpha female, because I've not really heard that talked about very much. It's usually like alpha male that you hear about.
Yeah, it's a very blunt thing, isn't it, really? It kind of fits into the patriarchal society that we live in, but that's an entirely separate discussion.
I was going to ask if you knew whether they were always like mates or whether the alpha female could be separate from the alpha male within the pack.
So yeah, the reality is that in the wild, in the familial wolves, they don't really use those titles, to be fair. They're mum and dad. They're the matriarch and patriarch of the family. They're the mum and dad of the family. And so they don't really use that alpha male, alpha female title over there. The wolves in captivity may have those titles, and they are most likely to be the mated wolves, as far as I understand. My complete wolf knowledge is not as strong and robust as my dog knowledge, I have to say. But my understanding is that they're most likely to be the mated wolves. They're most likely to be the most virile wolves, the ones that are most likely to have the reproductive rights as such to the pack. But yeah,
interesting.
Not comes up very often. It's most likely because of blokes being blokes, to be fair, as is the way with a lot of things. Super. Right, we shall leave it there, team. Hopefully this recording has worked and I can pop it up on YouTube. So if you want a recap or you'd like to share it with your friends, I'll send that out as a link. And if you'd like to join us next week, I would love to see you again next week, where I can share even more with you. Perfect. Thank you very much, team. Have a nice evening.